A millionaire was ridiculed for looking poor, and look what happened the next day. Life Stories, the luxurious restaurant Lucille d'Or shone like a jewel in the heart of the city. Its large windows reflected the night lights while inside, the elite of society indulged in exquisite dishes in an atmosphere of opulence and exclusivity. Amidst the clinking of crystal glasses and the murmur of refined conversations, a man with a simple appearance approached the entrance. Alejandro Vega, at 45 years old, was one of the country's most successful entrepreneurs, although few knew it. His minimalist philosophy and aversion to ostentation had kept him out of the public eye for years. Dressed in worn jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and sneakers, Alejandro approached the maitre d', a tall, thin man named Ernesto, who looked him up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Good evening. I would like a table for one, please," said Alejandro calmly. Ernesto, used to passing unnoticed, tried to reason. "I understand about the dress code, but I can see several empty tables from here. Are you sure you can't make an exception?" The situation caught the attention of Lucia, a young and ambitious waitress, who approached the maitre d'. "Is something wrong, Ernesto?" she asked curiously. "Nothing important, Lucia. I am just explaining to this gentleman that he doesn't meet our standards," Ernesto replied with a tone of superiority. Lucia looked at Alejandro and, instead of showing compassion, saw an opportunity to ingratiate herself with her superior. With a forced smile, she addressed the millionaire. "Sir, perhaps it would be better if you looked for a place more suited to your style. There's a cafe on the corner that might be more appropriate." Alejandro, feeling indignation rising within him, decided to make one last attempt. "I assure you, I can pay for dinner. Money is not a problem." Ernesto let out a derisive laugh. "Sir, this is no place for jokes. I ask you to leave before we are forced to call security." At that moment, a young waiter named Carlos joined the scene. Unlike his colleagues, Carlos seemed uncomfortable with the situation. "Ernesto, maybe we should," he began to say, but was brusquely interrupted. "Carlos, mind your own business. I'll handle this," snapped Ernesto. Alejandro, hurt in his pride but maintaining his composure, looked at each of those present before speaking. "Very well. I will leave, but I assure you this moment will not be forgotten." As he walked away from the restaurant, Alejandro could hear the mocking laughter of Ernesto, while Lucia watched the scene with a mix of embarrassment and concern. What none of them knew was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Alejandro Vega was not just a millionaire. He was the owner of one of the largest tech companies in the country and, coincidentally, an old friend of the owner of Lucille d'Or. As he walked down the sidewalk, away from the golden glow of the restaurant, Alejandro took out his phone and dialed a number. "Miguel, it's Alejandro. I need a favor." The following 2 days were busy for Alejandro Vega. Despite his reserved nature, the incident at Lucille d'Or had sparked a desire for justice in him that he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about personal revenge. Alejandro saw an opportunity to teach a valuable lesson about humility and equality. In his spacious apartment, Alejandro met with Miguel Ángel Ruiz, the owner of Lucille d'Or and his friend since university. Miguel, a burly man with an easy laugh and a thick mustache, listened with growing disbelief to the story of what had happened. "I can't believe it, Ale. I swear I had no idea my staff could behave that way," exclaimed Miguel, visibly upset. "I have always tried to instill values of respect and service in my restaurant." Alejandro, sitting in his favorite armchair, nodded understandingly. "I know, Miguel. That's why I want us to handle this in a way that serves as a lesson not just for your staff, but for everyone." As the two friends discussed the details of the plan, elsewhere in the city, life continued for the employees of Lucille d'Or. Lucia, the ambitious waitress, arrived at her small apartment after another exhausting shift. At 28, she dreamed of climbing the ladder in the luxury dining industry and saw her job at Lucille d'Or as a stepping stone to success. "Honey, I'm home," she announced as she closed the door behind her. Her boyfriend, Diego, a young lawyer struggling to establish himself in a prestigious firm, greeted her with a kiss. "How was your day, my love?" Lucia collapsed on the couch, exhaling a tired sigh. Same as always, although today we had a funny incident with a guy who looked like a bum trying to get into the restaurant. You should have seen how we kicked him out. Diego frowned, unconvinced. Don't you think you were a bit harsh? Maybe he was just someone who wanted to have dinner. Oh, Diego, you're too kind, Lucia replied with a condescending tone. In this business, you have to know how to distinguish. We can't let just anyone in and ruin the experience for the clients who really matter. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Carlos, the young waiter who had shown discomfort at the situation, was having dinner with his mother in their modest family home. Mom, do you think I was wrong not to stand up for that man at the restaurant? Carlos asked, stirring his plate of pasta distractedly. His mother, a woman with a kind expression and graying hair, looked at him tenderly. Son, you should always follow what your heart tells you. If you felt it was wrong, maybe next time you should speak up. Carlos nodded thoughtfully. At 24, he was still learning to navigate the complexities of the working and social world. The incident with the simply dressed man had left him with a feeling of unease he couldn't shake off. Back at Alejandro's apartment, the plan was taking shape. Miguel, still appalled by what had happened, had agreed to participate in the lesson his friend wanted to impart. Are you sure about this, Ale? Miguel asked, scratching his head. Don't you think it's a bit extreme? Alejandro got up and walked to the window, observing the city lights. Sometimes, Miguel, it takes a shock for people to really learn. I don't want to ruin lives. I just want them to understand the impact their actions and prejudices can have. Miguel nodded slowly. All right, I trust you, my friend. You've always had good judgment, even if your taste in clothes leaves much to be desired, he added with a smile. Alejandro laughed, grateful for the moment of levity. Tomorrow will be an interesting day, that I can assure you. As the two friends finalized the details, night fell over the city. At Lucille door, Ernesto closed the restaurant, satisfied with another successful day, unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. The stage was set, the actors unaware of their roles, and the director, Alejandro Vega, ready to orchestrate a lesson none of them would ever forget. The morning of the third day dawned with a palpable sense of anticipation in the air, at least for Alejandro and Miguel. For the rest of the staff at Lucille door, it was a day like any other, or so they thought. Ernesto arrived at the restaurant early, as was his custom. Dressed impeccably in his maitre d' suit, he began supervising the preparations for the lunch service. Lucia was not far behind, greeting her coworkers with her usual energy. Good morning, everyone, she said with a smile. Ready for another day of excellence? Carlos, who had just entered, responded with a timid, good morning, still reflecting on the events of 2 nights ago. The morning passed normally until around noon, when Miguel Angel Ruiz, the restaurant owner, made an unusual entrance. Normally, Miguel visited the establishment in the afternoons, so his presence at that hour caused some surprise among the staff. Mr. Ruiz, what a surprise to see you so early, greeted Ernesto, quickly approaching his boss. Miguel, with a serious expression unusual for him, nodded briefly. Ernesto, I need you to gather all the staff in the main hall. We have a special guest today, and I want everyone to be present. Intrigued and a little worried, Ernesto began gathering the staff. In a few minutes, all employees, from waiters to cooks, were in the elegant main hall, murmuring among themselves and speculating about the reason for this impromptu meeting. Miguel stood before them, his imposing figure immediately capturing everyone's attention. Thank you for gathering so quickly. As I mentioned, today we have a very special guest, someone who, I fear, was not treated with the respect he deserves during a recent visit to our establishment. A murmur of confusion ran through the group. Ernesto and Lucia exchanged nervous glances while Carlos felt his heart begin to race. At that moment, the restaurant doors opened, and Alejandro Vega entered, dressed exactly as he had been 2 nights ago, worn jeans, a white t-shirt, and sneakers. The silence that fell over the hall was absolute. Ernesto visibly paled, instantly recognizing the man he had kicked out of the restaurant. Lucia brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp of surprise. Carlos, on the other hand, felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Miguel approached Alejandro and, to everyone's astonishment, embraced him warmly. "Friends," he said, addressing the staff, "I'd like to introduce you to Alejandro Vega, my lifelong friend and, more importantly, one of the most successful and respected entrepreneurs in our country." The shock was palpable. Ernesto looked as if he were about to faint, while Lucia couldn't take her eyes off the floor, her face flushed with embarrassment. Alejandro stepped forward, his presence filling the room despite his simple attire. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice calm but firm. "2 nights ago, I tried to dine at this beautiful restaurant. Unfortunately, I was judged by my appearance and treated in a manner that I am sure does not reflect the values Miguel tries to instill in this establishment." The employees listened in utter silence, the gravity of what had happened sinking in like a heavy weight. "I am not here for revenge," Alejandro continued. "I'm here to impart a crucial lesson on respect, dignity, and the perils of hasty judgments." Miguel spoke up again. "What happened is unacceptable and contradicts everything Lucille d'Or stands for. We've built our reputation not only on culinary excellence but also on treating all our guests with equality and respect." Alejandro nodded, appreciating his friend's words. "However," he added, "I believe this situation requires more than words, it needs action." The atmosphere in the room grew even tenser. Ernesto, mustering all his courage, stepped forward. "Mr. Ruiz, I take full responsibility for what happened. It was my decision and my mistake. I am deeply ashamed and sorry." Alejandro looked at Ernesto, assessing the sincerity of his apology. "I appreciate your honesty, Ernesto, but I'm afraid you were not the only one involved in the incident." Lucia, sensing her moment to speak, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "I was involved as well. My words were cruel and unjustified. I'm very sorry." Carlos, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "Mr. Vega, I didn't say anything to defend you that night. I felt uncomfortable with the situation but lacked the courage to intervene. I am truly sorry." Alejandro considered the 3 employees' apologies. Then, with a sigh, he addressed the entire staff. "What happened that night reflects a broader societal issue. We judge people based on their appearance, their clothing, their manner of speaking, without taking the time to truly know them. In my case, I have the means to respond to such unjust treatment. But what about those who do not?" Miguel intervened again. "As a result of this incident, we've decided to take drastic measures. Lucia, I'm sorry to inform you that you are dismissed effective immediately." A collective gasp swept through the room. Ernesto seemed to age 10 years in an instant, while Lucia broke down in tears. The rest of the staff looked on with a mixture of shock and sympathy. Miguel continued, "The rest of the staff will undergo intensive training on customer service, diversity, and inclusion. I will not allow something like this to happen again in my establishment." Alejandro raised a hand, requesting to speak. "If I may, I'd like to add something. Carlos, your honesty in admitting your inaction is admirable. Sometimes remaining silent in the face of injustice is as harmful as perpetrating it. However, I see potential in you for growth and learning. If you are willing, I would like to offer you a position in my company. I believe your experience here, combined with this lesson, will make you an excellent advocate for equality and respect in the workplace." Carlos, astonished, could barely stammer a "thank you," as his colleagues looked on with a mix of surprise and envy. Ernesto and Lucia, still reeling from their dismissal, were preparing to leave when Alejandro stopped them. "One moment, please," Alejandro said. "Although your actions were unacceptable, I believe in second chances. I propose that you spend a month volunteering at a soup kitchen. If, after that time, you show a genuine change in attitude and behavior, I will be willing to reconsider your employment status, either here or at one of my companies." The shock on Ernesto and Lucia's faces was evident. This was not the retaliation they had expected but rather a chance for redemption they weren't sure they deserved. Miguel, visibly moved by his friend's generosity, addressed the staff. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of true class and compassion. I hope we all learn from this experience and become better people and professionals. As the staff began to disperse, still processing the morning's events, Alejandro approached Miguel. Do you think we were too harsh? He asked quietly. Miguel shook his head. You were fair and compassionate, my friend. This lesson will resonate not just with them but with everyone who hears this story. What none of those present knew was that this incident was about to set off a series of events that would change not only the lives of those involved but also public perceptions of equal treatment in the service industry. As Alejandro and Miguel left the restaurant, the employees began to go their separate ways, each lost in their thoughts and reflections. The lesson had been tough but necessary, and for some, like Lucia, the consequences of their actions were far from over. In the days following the incident at Lucille Door, emotions and changes swirled for everyone involved. The news of Ernesto and Lucia's dismissal quickly spread through the city's luxury restaurant circle, sparking debate and reflection in the industry. For Lucia, the blow was especially harsh. Not only had she lost her job, but her reputation in the industry had been tarnished. Sitting on the small couch in her apartment, clutching the letter detailing her assignment to the soup kitchen, she felt as if her world had crumbled. Diego, her boyfriend, entered the room with 2 cups of coffee. How are you feeling, love? He asked, sitting beside her. Lucia looked up, her eyes red from crying. It feels like everything I worked for has been shattered. I worked so hard to get where I was, and now, because of a stupid lapse in judgment, it's all gone. Diego wrapped an arm around her, trying to comfort her. Come on, it's not the end of the world. You have the chance to make things right, to show that you've learned from this. And if I can't? Lucia asked, fear evident in her voice. What if Mr. Vega decides I don't deserve a second chance? Diego was silent for a moment, considering his words. Lucia, I need to be honest with you. What you did was wrong. I've always been concerned about your obsession with climbing the luxury restaurant ladder and how sometimes you seem to forget the humanity of people in the process. Lucia looked at him, surprised by the harshness of his words. What do you mean? I mean, Diego continued, maybe this is an opportunity for you to reassess your view of the hospitality industry. Wasn't it meant to bring happiness to people through unforgettable experiences? Diego's words struck a deep chord with Lucia. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to truly reflect on her actions and motivations. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Carlos was preparing for his first day at Alejandro Vega's company. Standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with nervous hands, he couldn't believe the turn his life had taken. His mother entered the room, a proud smile on her face. Look at you, son, so handsome and professional, she said. Carlos turned to her, anxiety clear in his eyes. Mom, what if I'm not up to the task? Mr. Vega has placed his trust in me. But his mother interrupted him with a hug. Carlos, Mr. Vega saw something special in you. He saw your heart, your ability to acknowledge your mistakes, and your desire to be better. That's more valuable than any work experience. Inspired by his mother's words, Carlos took a deep breath and headed towards his new future. In Alejandro Vega's office, the billionaire gazed out at the city through his large windows, while Miguel, seated in a leather chair, watched his friend with curiosity. Are you sure you want to take this further, Ale? Miguel asked. Alejandro turned to his friend. Miguel, what happened in your restaurant is just the tip of the iceberg. How many people are judged, mistreated, or ignored every day just because of their appearance or perceived social status? I believe we have the opportunity, and the responsibility, to change that. Miguel nodded slowly. And what do you have in mind? A nationwide awareness campaign, Alejandro replied, his eyes shining with determination. We'll use my media influence and your network in the hospitality industry to tell our story and share the stories of others who have faced similar discrimination. That's ambitious, Miguel said, a smile forming on his lips. But if anyone can do it, it's you, my friend. As Alejandro and Miguel planned their campaign, on the other side of the city, Ernesto and Lucia prepared for their first day of volunteering. The former maitre, stripped of his elegant uniform and dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, looked apprehensively at the line of people waiting for their meals. Lucia, standing by his side, took a deep breath. "Well, I guess it's time to start our redemption," she said, heading to the kitchen to collect trays of food. What neither of them knew was that this day would mark the beginning of a profound transformation, not only in their lives but in how society perceived and treated others, regardless of their appearance or status. As the sun set over the city, the lives of Alejandro, Carlos, Lucia, and Ernesto intertwined in ways none of them could have imagined. The stage was set for a significant social change, and they were, unknowingly, at the center of it all. The following weeks were a period of intense transformation for all involved in the Lucille Door incident. While Alejandro Vega and Miguel Ángel Ruiz worked tirelessly on their awareness campaign, Carlos, Lucia, and Ernesto found their lives taking unexpected turns. Carlos, in his new role at Alejandro's company, found himself immersed in a world of opportunities he had never imagined. His main task was to help develop a training program in diversity and inclusion for service sector businesses. Each day, he learned something new about empathy, communication, and leadership. One afternoon, while working in his office, Carlos received an unexpected call. "Carlos, it's Lucia," said a familiar voice on the other end. Carlos was surprised. He hadn't spoken to Lucia since the restaurant incident. "Lucia? What a surprise. How are you?" There was a pause before Lucia responded. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you at the restaurant, and for how I treated everyone, really. This time at the soup kitchen has opened my eyes." Carlos listened attentively as Lucia shared her experiences, how she had met people from all walks of life, how she had learned to look beyond appearances and value the inherent dignity of every individual. "I'm glad to hear that," Carlos said sincerely. "It sounds like you've learned a lot." "Yes," Lucia replied. "And I wanted to ask if you could speak with Mr. Vega. I'd like a chance to prove that I've changed." Carlos promised to do what he could, moved by his former colleague's transformation. Meanwhile, at the soup kitchen, Ernesto was having his own epiphany. The former maitre, used to dealing with society's elite, was now serving meals to the homeless, minimum wage workers, and families struggling to make ends meet. One day, while serving soup, an elderly woman took his hand. "Thank you, son," she said with a toothless smile. "Not just for the food, but for treating us like people." Those words hit Ernesto like a bolt of lightning. He realized that, in all his years at Lucille Door, he had rarely seen his clients as real people with their own stories and struggles. They had always been just VIPs or important reservations. That night, Ernesto wrote a long letter to Alejandro Vega, apologizing again for his actions and sharing what he had learned. "I've spent my entire career judging people by their appearance or status," he wrote. "Now I understand that true hospitality doesn't distinguish between a millionaire and someone who is homeless. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." In Alejandro's office, the awareness campaign was taking shape. They had gathered dozens of stories from people who had experienced discrimination in restaurants, hotels, and other service establishments. The public's response was overwhelming. "Ale, you won't believe this," Miguel said, bursting into the office with his phone in hand. "The National Restaurant Association wants to meet with us. They're interested in implementing our training program nationwide." Alejandro smiled, satisfied with the progress but aware there was still much to be done. "It's a good start, Miguel. But let's not forget that true change starts with each individual." As Alejandro reviewed the campaign reports, he received a message from Carlos requesting an urgent meeting. Intrigued, he agreed to see him immediately. Carlos entered the office, visibly nervous. "Mr. Vega, I've been reflecting a lot on what happened at the restaurant and on the opportunity you gave me," Carlos began. "I'm listening," Alejandro said. "I believe Lucia and Ernesto deserve a second chance," Carlos said in one breath. "I've spoken with Lucia and read Ernesto's letter. They have changed, Mr. Vega. They've truly learned their lesson." Alejandro listened attentively as Carlos advocated for his former colleagues, impressed by the young man's compassion and maturity. "You know, Carlos," Alejandro finally said, One of the most important lessons we can learn is about forgiveness and redemption. I'm glad to see you've already learned that. That night, as the city prepared for sleep, Alejandro made a decision that would alter several lives. He sent 2 messages, one to Lucia and one to Ernesto. The next morning, Ernesto requested a meeting in his office. When Lucia and Ernesto arrived at the imposing lobby of Alejandro Vega's office building, both were clearly anxious, aware that this meeting could influence the direction of their careers. Ernesto greeted Lucia with a tentative wave, and she responded with a nod. "Any idea why we're here?" Ernesto asked, but before Lucia could reply, Carlos appeared in the lobby. "Good morning," Carlos said with a warm smile. "Mr. Vega is expecting you. Please follow me." As they rode the elevator up, a tense silence fell among them. Sensing their discomfort, Carlos decided to break the ice. "You know, I've been working on a really interesting project," he began. "We're developing a training program focused on inclusion and customer service. I think both of you could offer valuable perspectives." Lucia and Ernesto exchanged surprised glances, wondering if this was a hint about what lay ahead. When they entered Alejandro's office, they found not only the wealthy man but also Miguel Angel Ruiz. Alejandro welcomed them with a kind gesture, thanking them for coming. "I've been closely following your progress with the soup kitchen and have read your reflections. I must say, I'm impressed with the transformation you've both undergone." Lucia and Ernesto's faces brightened with a glimmer of hope. However, Alejandro continued, "Words and good intentions alone aren't enough. Real change is demonstrated through consistent actions over time." At this point, Miguel spoke up. "We've been discussing how we could leverage your experiences and new insights to effect real change in the industry. That's why I want to make you an offer. We're launching a national initiative to promote inclusion and equal treatment in the service sector. We'd like you both to be part of this project." Lucia and Ernesto were at a loss for words, overwhelmed by the opportunity presented. Alejandro explained that their role would be to share their stories, the lessons they've learned, and help train others in the industry. "It won't be easy. You'll need to confront your past mistakes publicly and work hard to earn others' trust." "I don't know what to say," Ernesto stammered. "It's more than we deserve." Lucia, with tears in her eyes, added, "We're deeply grateful for this opportunity, Mr. Vega. We won't let you down." "I hope not," Alejandro replied with a smile. "Because the real work starts now." Over the following weeks, Alejandro Vega's initiative began to take shape. Lucia and Ernesto, along with Carlos, became the public faces of the campaign. They shared their stories at conferences, workshops, and in the media, highlighting how their prejudices had led to serious mistakes and how they learned to see beyond appearances. The public response was overwhelming. Many people related to their stories, either as victims of discrimination or as individuals recognizing their own biases. The campaign sparked a national dialogue about equal treatment and human dignity. One day, while preparing for an important conference presentation, Lucia received an unexpected call from Diego, her ex-boyfriend. "Lucia, I've been following your work in the news," Diego said. "I'm truly impressed with what you've achieved. You've changed so much." Lucia smiled, feeling a mix of nostalgia and pride. "Thank you, Diego. It's been a challenging but rewarding journey." Diego continued, "I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime and catch up." Lucia thought for a moment. "That would be nice, Diego, but just as friends. I've learned so much about myself over these months, and I think I need to focus on my personal growth for now." Diego agreed, respecting her decision. As she hung up, Lucia realized how much she had matured. She was no longer obsessed with status and appearances but had come to value empathy and authenticity. Meanwhile, Ernesto had discovered a new passion in working with marginalized communities. His experience at the soup kitchen had opened his eyes to the daily struggles many people faced, and he now spent much of his free time organizing charity events and mentoring programs for underprivileged youth. Carlos had become a respected leader within Alejandro's company. His unique perspective and commitment to equality made him an invaluable asset to the team. As the campaign gained momentum, Alejandro and his team began to see real changes in the industry. More and more restaurants and hotels adopted inclusion policies and diversity training programs. Customers also became more aware, demanding equal treatment for everyone. One afternoon, as Alejandro looked out over the city from his office, he reflected on how a single incident had sparked a social movement. He smiled, thinking about the lives that had been transformed, including his own. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his assistant. "Mr. Vega, there's a call from the Ministry of Labor. They want to discuss the possibility of implementing your training program nationwide across all service sectors." Alejandro's smile widened. The change they had initiated was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the incident at Lucille d'Or, and the city buzzed with a different energy. Alejandro Vega's campaign had transcended the hospitality industry, becoming a social movement advocating for equality and respect in all areas of life. On a sunny Sunday morning, Alejandro stood once more in front of Lucille d'Or. This time, he was not alone. Carlos, Lucia, and Ernesto were with him, all dressed casually yet elegantly. "Are you all ready?" Alejandro asked with a smile. They nodded, a mix of nerves and excitement on their faces. Together, they entered the restaurant. The interior of Lucille d'Or had subtly changed. While maintaining its air of elegance, it now had a more inviting and less pretentious atmosphere. Alongside expensive paintings, photographs of diverse clients and staff adorned the walls. Miguel greeted them warmly. "Welcome! It's a pleasure to have you here again," he said. Customers in the restaurant, recognizing the now famous faces of the inclusion campaign, murmured excitedly. Some even approached to greet and express their support. As they made their way to their table, Lucia noticed a young waitress watching them with admiration. She paused to speak with her. "Hi, I'm Lucia." She introduced herself with a warm smile. "I know," the young woman replied enthusiastically. "I've followed your campaign closely. It's an inspiration to many of us." Lucia felt a surge of emotion. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Sophia," the waitress said. "I started working here a month ago, right after taking the training course you developed. It has completely changed my perspective on customer service." As Lucia and Sophia talked, Ernesto went to the kitchen to greet the staff. To his surprise, he recognized several faces from the soup kitchen where he had volunteered. Pedro, a middle-aged man he remembered serving, greeted him with a broad smile. "Mr. Ernesto, what a pleasure to see you. Thanks to the job training program you implemented, several of us got jobs here. Mr. Rees gave us a chance." Ernesto felt a lump in his throat. The circle had closed in the most beautiful way possible. Meanwhile, Carlos animatedly chatted with a group of customers who had recognized him, discussing the campaign's latest developments and how they were working with the government to implement national inclusion policies. Alejandro watched all this with a mix of pride and satisfaction. He approached Miguel, who was standing by the bar. "It seems we've come a long way, don't you think, my friend?" Alejandro said. Miguel nodded, his face lit up with a smile. "To think it all started with a misunderstanding at the restaurant door." "Sometimes, Miguel," Alejandro responded. "I believe the universe has a peculiar way of teaching us lessons." "Certainly," Miguel agreed. "But what's important is what we do with those lessons." At that moment, an elderly man approached them, dressed in simple but clean clothes, his face marked by a lifetime of experiences. "Excuse me," the man said in a trembling voice. "Are you Alejandro Vega?" "Yes, I am," Alejandro replied, intrigued. "How can I assist you?" The man extended his hand. "I just wanted to thank you. A few months ago, I tried to enter this restaurant to celebrate my wife's birthday, but we were turned away due to our appearance. Thanks to your campaign, we were able to dine here last week. It was the best gift I could give my wife for our 50th anniversary." Alejandro shook the man's hand, deeply moved. "Thank you for sharing your story. It's people like you who make our work meaningful." As the man walked away, Alejandro and Miguel exchanged knowing glances. Without needing words, they understood that all their effort and challenges had been worthwhile. The dinner proceeded in an atmosphere of camaraderie and celebration. Lucia, Ernesto, and Carlos shared anecdotes about their experiences over the past months, laughing about the challenges they had faced and marveling at how much they had grown as individuals. At the end of the night, when the restaurant was nearly empty, Alejandro stood up and raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, capturing everyone's attention. "To second chances, to the power of change, and to the beauty of seeing beyond appearances. But most importantly, I want to toast to Lucia, Ernesto, and Carlos, who have shown that the true measure of a person's character is not in their mistakes but in how they learn and grow from them." Everyone raised their glasses, the clinking of crystal resonating in the quiet restaurant. As they left Lucille door that night, Alejandro paused to look back. The restaurant that had once been the scene of a painful incident now symbolized change and hope. "All good, Alejandro?" Miguel asked, noticing his friend's pause. Alejandro smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "Better than good, Miguel. This is just the beginning." Under the starry city sky, Alejandro Vega and his friends left Lucille door, not as the wealthy man and the fallen employees they once were, but as a team united by a common mission: to make the world a more inclusive and respectful place, one person at a time. As they walked down the sidewalk, their laughter and conversations blended with the city's night sounds, a city that, thanks to them, had begun to see beyond appearances and appreciate the true essence of each human being.